And a pleasant good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Williams, and I'm your host. Welcome to the program. And we are back for our first taping of the new year. It has been really extremely busy for OBS during the month of January to where we had to put on some specialty programming. Uh, Nevertheless, those programmings was also informative as well. But this is our first live taping of the show for 2023. And our first guest is Mark Herschberg. Hope I pronounced that correctly.
Herschberg, close enough.
Okay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so first question is always, please tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Or I do a couple different things. My background is that I came out of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, back in the 90s during the dot-com era. And I got involved with tech startups. Most of my career has been doing that. I currently work as a chief technology and product officer. So I oversee tech and product at startup companies. That's what I've done most of my career. But early on, I realized, knowing that I wanted to get to this senior level title, being one of the leaders in the company, I realized that to get there, there were a number of skills I needed that no one taught me. I had taken classes in engineering, but no one ever taught me leadership, networking, negotiation, team building, communication, all these other critical skills that we need in the workplace that just are not included in our education system. So I began to develop them in myself and quickly realized these skills are not just for senior leaders, but for everyone. So I began to upskill my entire team. Now, around the same time, MIT had found a similar gap. They were hearing from companies, this was a shortage they were seeing in the workforce, not just in college grads, not just in engineers, but universal. These skills were also lacking. So at MIT, we create a program referred to as the Career Success Accelerator, where we instilled these skills into our students. I wound up 20 some years ago helping to create that class, and I've been teaching there ever since. So I've had this parallel career in addition to building tech startups, teaching at MIT and elsewhere. And then more recently, I put out the book, The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, partially inspired by some of that class, and then also created the Brain Bump app as a side project to the other work I do to help people retain and learn, not just from my book, but in a more general way from other books, podcasts, and other sources.
And ladies and gentlemen, for formal introduction's sake that we always do. Mark is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, and a creator of the Brain app, the Brain Bump app, that is. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems. Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500 and in academia with over a dozen patents to his name. He helped to start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. He also works with many nonprofits and currently serves on the board of an organization called Plant a Million Corals. So I'm very intrigued about this one thing, dealing with criminals and terrorists on the dark web. Uh, that's does not seem to get a lot of attention these days. I would love to have your expertise, perhaps maybe a short history of what's been going on in the dark web. First of all, what is considered to be the dark web and what type of things that goes on there.
The dark web has this ominous sounding name. It's not quite as scary as you think. The definition of the dark web is simply parts of the internet that aren't easily indexed. We think about search engines like Google that can show us everything out there, but the dark web isn't really visible to those search engines. Often it's because it uses a different protocol. The Tor protocol is most common. And so the search engine simply can't go and index it and find it. The dark web isn't inherently a bad place, but the analogy I like to use, if you were a criminal, you would choose to do your criminal activities in the dark alley and not the broadly lit street. It doesn't mean the dark alley is bad, but people choose it for the bad things they do. Likewise, the dark web, it's not inherently bad, but people doing bad things do it on the dark web because there's less visibility, just like the dark alley. And what we have on the dark web is really just a place that nefarious groups hang out. This includes cyber criminals. It includes more traditional physical criminals. It includes terrorists. It includes people just looking to do things outside of societal norms and rules and regulations. There's a lot of marketplaces. There's a lot of discussion boards. There's a lot of interaction. What it has allowed is for the criminal world to do what we have done over the past few decades. If you think about society, if we roll it back 40, 50 years, I could interact, I could work with people who were reachable by me, people in the same city, or certainly in the US, I could talk to people in different cities. But with the advent of email and other tools, I could start to collaborate and work together and do business with people all over the world. When you think about the criminals, it used to be they would just do things with the others with whom they could interact. But especially now that criminal activity has become electronic, and because of the dark web, they can start to interact with other criminals and criminal organizations all over the world, allowing them to be more efficient and sophisticated. So we've seen that growth.
But also now you have, many people, they disguise themselves, as somebody else, and they go on social media and they try to take advantage of people, whether it's financially or try to take over their identity. And they come up with these different phrases, on social media. Like, for example, I would make a post and someone would say, I, enjoy your conversation. I think you contribute a lot to social media. Please click on my profile to, let's say, and send me a friend request. They may do that. In the podcasting world, we get a lot of, messages that say, drop your podcast link. And then when we do that, they'll say, inbox me, or they'll send us a, private message. Basically, they either selling a service or they're asking for money. Now, isn't that now these people, they're out in the open. So what is the difference between a scammer trying to scam their way for a living versus what people do on what we consider to be the dark web? Is there similarities or they're both different?
Well, they're different. The people you mentioned who say, "Oh, drop your link," and then they send you email saying, "Oh, now buy our services." It's not technically a scam. It I'd have to see more information. We'd have to look at the definition of the law. Those are certainly people who are spammers, And by the way, I get plenty of those too. Plenty of people even saying, "Oh, I see you're on a podcast, share the episode." So they are spammers. Now, spam is technically illegal, but we don't think of it as nefarious. So there are spammers who do it out in the open. You could argue it's a scam in the sense that it is a bait and switch, depending on what was offered prior to that initial email you sent. But what we see on the dark web are people really creating ecosystems of criminal organizations. So, for example, we know people go and steal credit cards. Now, it used to be, when you roll back 30 some years, you needed to be an expert in how you break into computers and how you can find credit card numbers. There weren't quite as many around 30 years ago, but you break in, you find the credit card numbers, you pull them down, and you find a way to extract money from them, as a cash out. Today, however, what we see is specialization. So just like in our surface good world, where I say, I don't want to deal with HR functions, I'm going to have a third-party company take care of that for me. I need help maintaining my servers, I'm going to have someone do that, or someone write the software for me. I can rely on all sorts of third-party companies to do parts of my business I'm just not good at. We say the same thing criminally. There are some people who are experts at writing code to break in to people's accounts. There are some people who are experts at using that code to phish people, which is a term for how you get in and trick someone to gain access, which then allows you to get credit card information. There are people who are experts at selling those credit cards, and there are people who are experts at taking stolen credit cards and taking money out of them. So you get an entire supply chain where someone says, well, I'm good at this one part, so I will buy from someone upstream and I will sell to someone downstream, and they can worry about the rest of it. And so we've gotten much more sophisticated ecosystems. And what we've also seen, again, is the ability for people globally to collaborate to be much more efficient and effective.
That sounds like something similar than someone is doing on social media. They're pretending to be someone else in order to sell a service, or they're trying to uh, take their identity. Phishing is very popular on social media as well. They do it in a way that may seem legitimate, but it's really not. And when you complain to places like Facebook, well, they said, well, they're not, they're not violating, their service agreement. I'm like, yes, they are. They're pretending to be someone else in order to take advantage of someone else. That was like a scam to me.
It
When
is
not to
the
mention dishonest, it's
the thing
dishonest.
the thing to remember is this is nothing new. This is not, oh, this happened recently and it's a scourge on society. This has been going on
Oh yeah,
for
I understand. I understand that. I understand it's nothing new. I mean, it has evolved, if anything else.
what's really changed, because people have been doing these scams for hundreds of years and probably even thousands. What's changed is that now we can use software to automate it. So just as we use software to automate accounting or automate putting together a show like this, and we get much more efficient. To do a show like this 60 years ago, you had a team of people, you had experts in different systems, and now of course we can automate it and you can do it yourself or with minimal assistance from others. When you think about accountants auditing a company, there used to be teams of people, and now everything's electronic and you can run software and fewer people can do it faster. The same is true of some of these scams, because now some of these scammers, some of these cyber criminals can use software not to target people one at a time, but to literally target thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all at once, which just makes them much more efficient. And that's why we see more of it, because each of the criminals out there, it's not that there's a larger percentage of them, they're just wider reaching thanks to automation.
It's kind of like evolution of organized crime.
Exactly. This is just the next phase in it.
Um, that makes sense. That's a great analogy. Appreciate that. And now we're going to switch gears here and talk about your app. App is called Brain Bump. What is it and what does it do?
I have been teaching for decades. I've written a book, and I've certainly read books and learned throughout my career. So often we have trouble retaining information. We read a book and forget what was in the book 2 weeks later. And I'm talking specifically about a business book, a self-help book, books with knowledge. Fiction books, that's a different category that I'm not focused on. But when we read a book, we do so, or we listen to a podcast like this, or take a class, or go to a talk. We do so because we want to learn, to acquire and use knowledge. The problem is where you read information isn't where you need information. So we have a disconnect. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how we can help people retain and more effectively use the things they learn from books, blogs, podcasts, and other sources. When I think about the use of information, it comes in two forms. So I'll take two examples from my book. I have a chapter on networking, how to network. You read that sitting at home. You bought my book, you're sitting on your couch, you're reading the book. You're not doing a lot of networking from home. It's 2 months later when you're at some event, you're saying, oh, I wish I remembered those networking tips. I wish I had them right here. And while in theory, you can have a ebook version on your phone, you're not going to scroll through it and try to see what was it he wrote about. So what if you could take the key ideas? It's like you took notes from the book, had those key ideas right at your fingertips, and you can pull them up in seconds right before you walk into that event just to get them back to top of mind. That's one usage mode. That's the just-in-time access to information. The other use case is, again, we read a book and we get this knowledge, but we don't always know when and where we'll use it. So for example, I have a chapter on management and leadership. Think, well, I don't know exactly when I need to use this technique, but I really want to remember it so it's top of mind. We know spaced repetition works. That's a fancy name for seeing something over and over. It's why when we were in school, we'd read the book, and then we'd probably look at the textbook a few more times before the test just to keep it top of mind. Or we'd use flashcards to see the information over and over. So imagine if you had like a daily affirmation in an app, but instead of perhaps spiritual or horoscope information, you had information from that source, from that talk, that blog, that podcast there, so it's accessible. So that every morning you could say, I am going into the office and I want to get 9 a.m. as I go into the office, as I get my head in that headspace, I want to see a management tip. And maybe at 6 p.m. as I head home, that's where my marriage has been on the rocks. I read this book on how to strengthen your marriage. At 6 p.m., that's when I want to get a marriage tip. And so what we're effectively doing is we're changing from a push to a pull when it comes to information. Because this broadcast, for example, we're sharing information with the audience, and this is going to go out on a certain date, and you'll probably promote it on social media, and I certainly will too. And it goes on a certain date, but that moment may not be relevant to people. The information we're sharing here and now may not be relevant to someone when they first hear this. Most people don't say, well, I'm going to bookmark that podcast because maybe in 6 months I need that advice. But with the Brain Bump app, what we're doing is we're taking these key ideas. It's like someone took the notes for you from a show like this, from a book, from a talk. They're all in individual tip cards. They are all tagged. So similar to social media with hashtags, are all tagged by category. And you can open the app. Everything is free. You can download the tips from different podcasts, different books. We're constantly adding new sources every month. And you can pull up the category of tips you need when you need it, either in that just-in-time access or to get that daily reminder at a time you set. We never send you notifications you didn't ask for. I know I hate it when my phone's constantly buzzing. It's you set what you want when you want to get it. And so you're getting relevant content. You're pulling to you content that is relevant when it is most relevant to you. And that's what the Brain Bump app does.
Oh, are there any other apps like this?
Remarkably, there are not. And it really surprised me. In fact, when I first came up with this idea, I said, well, this is actually kind of obvious now that I think about it. Surely someone has built this. I'll just license it for my book, because I wanted people not just to read the book, but to retain and remember and access. And it didn't exist. Now, there are slightly similar things. There are flashcard apps, and there are flashcard apps for specific types of content. If you want to learn a language, there are apps for that. If you want to study for the SATs, there are flashcard apps for that. There are also flashcard apps where you can create your own flashcards. Then there are daily affirmation apps, and they've got a set of content, and they will send you each day some type of affirmation from their existing set. Most of those are very religious or spiritual. There are also book summary apps. So there are apps out there that say, we've read the book, we're going to boil it down to about a 12-minute read. And so instead of buying and reading the whole book, you can just read this and you'll get the key ideas. But the combination of the three is unique. And so we're not saying, here's a summary of the book. We're saying these are the key takeaways. It's not even summarized. It's as if you went through the book with a highlighter. Said, all right, this is key. Oh, that over there, that's key. So you get all of those highlights. And again, from books, blogs, podcasts, other sources, we do it all. And then you can access it either in that just-in-time flashcard mode, or you can access it in that daily affirmation where you don't even need to open the app. You can set it up to get the push. So this combination of all three, that is unique, and we're the only ones to do it, and actually have a patent pending on it.
Oh, please do, by all means. Now, according to my notes, this app has three basic functions. First, you have your library where you discover content and add it to the app. This can be content you use or new ones you find. Second one is you have tips on here. Find tips when needed, save and filter, save some to favorites, kind of like a bookmark, or share on social media with full formatting functionality. And then we have passive learning, browser tips, save some to favorites or share on social media. Um, who will benefit from this, from using this app?
Great question. The app, which is completely free, can be used in one of two ways by people who want to learn. It may be that you are reading a book or listening to a podcast or hearing a talk or a class. You say, boy, I want to remember this. This is great information. I know I'm going to forget within a few weeks. We all do. I want to better retain this. And so you can then, if they have their content, that creator of the course, of the book, of the podcast, if they put their content on there, and we have more content coming every month, you can add it, and you can then have access to it so it stays top of mind. So you better retain it and have access to it. And remember, everything is free. Now, the other way to use it, because everything is free and we don't check, oh, wait, did you actually buy this book? You can say, hey, I just heard Mark on a podcast, and maybe I'll buy his book. I'm not sure yet. Let me go check out his content on the app, because my book, The Career Toolkit, is on the app. And you can go in and say, well, let me see, is this going to be worth it to me? And you can go in and see, here are some of the tips. Here are some of the key ideas. It may not make quite as much sense. It's not designed as something you read through. We're not the book summary app, but you're going to see, here are the key ideas. And look, if you say, this is great, this is helpful, and I don't want to buy his book, that's okay. I am glad I was able to help you. You can download BrainBump for free. You can get all the content on BrainBump for free. So I am glad to have helped you. But you might say, wow, this is really helpful. I want to go deeper. I want to go and now buy the book. Same thing with a podcast. I don't know if this podcast is worth listening to, but let me see what are the key ideas coming out of it. This is interesting. Now I want to subscribe to the podcast. So you can use it either for content you are already engaged with, reading, listening to help you remember it, or you can use it to explore new content, because again, everything's free. The app is free. The content on there is free. So you can check things out at no cost. And we're adding new content every month. We're like a streaming service. We're always putting in more and more content. So it's going to grow a lot this year.
Do you think that this will help? Can this be used as a tool for teachers to get students to retain information that they're learning in school?
I certainly hope so. We know flashcards work, and there are flashcard apps for certain content, but the amount of content's pretty limited. Again, we've got language, we've got SATs, we got math flashcards, but there's probably not a set of flashcards for, let's say, US history, or for British history, or for geology. There's a whole bunch of topics, and we are designed that content creators, that's our general term for authors, podcasters, bloggers, speakers, and course instructors, we allow content creators to put their content on the server. We are open so people can go and add their content and then tell their audience, whether it's their students, their readers, or listeners, hey, my content is on here, and we have tools to make it easy for them to share and expose their content. My content is on here. Now you can download it. Now you can use this to help remember. So I certainly hope this gets adopted by teachers at all sorts of levels to help their students learn and retain.
Now, how are people able to get more information about this app, or if they want to download it, how they'll be able to do that?
You can go to our website, brainbumpapp.com, and there you can follow the links to the Android and iPhone stores. If you're doing it on your phone, you can click through. If you've got on your desktop, we've got the QR codes that you can snap with your phone. And so at brainbumpapp.com, we'll take you right to the store where you can download the completely free app. If you are a content creator, at the bottom of brainbumpapp.com, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a little form. It says apply now. You click that button. You just give us your information. Who are you? Your contact information, what your content is about, and we'll be in touch about getting your content onto the app, because of course we are growing, and this year we're going to get a lot more content on the app.
Great. And this is, I do encourage you to take a look at this app. Believe that it's going to revolutionize the way that we not only store information, but to be able to retain information as well. Um, I'm sure that it's going to be useful for you. So now we will switch gears here and talk about your book, The Career Kit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. Uh, I get the initial title, The Career Toolkit, but the secondary tagline here, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. Uh, why is that included in the book?
Let's take a skill like networking. I'm sure you've heard networking is important. We've all heard that. I remember hearing it from when I was a little kid. My parents said to me, my teacher said to me, everyone says networking is so important. When did anyone ever sit you down and say, let's talk about how you can network? No one ever sat you down and said, here's how to do it. Here's how to be effective. We've taught you the multiplication tables. as well we should. We've taught you American history as well we should, and English grammar, and very important things. But this is also important, and we've told you it's important, but we never taught you how to do it. And we see over and over again, companies list, here are the skills we're looking for. There are the domain-specific skills. You might be a nurse or an accountant or a teacher, and you have certain knowledge that the rest of us don't. But then there are these general skills that we see across industries, across jobs, across levels that companies want consistently. In surveys over decades, we see the same topics come up: leadership, communication, team building, networking, negotiating. We see this come up, and yet we don't teach it to anyone. So there is a gap in what companies want and how we're training people to get jobs.
And this book covers a whole number of topics, including career planning, working effectively. Um, deals with interviews, talks about leadership, management, communication, networking, negotiations, ethics, developing skills that organizations are looking for, book writing and publishing are some of the categories. And there are a lot of people that can benefit from this, such as executives. If you're just starting to go into the workforce as an entry level person, it can be for college students. If you work in human resources, if you're a nonprofit, does not matter what gender you are, it covers a whole range of audience members. So, why, first of all, why did you decide to write this book?
When 20 some years ago, we got the feedback from a survey we did at MIT, we saw this shortcoming. And again, this is not unique to MIT or to engineers or to college students. I have seen similar research from all sorts of different parties at all sorts of levels and industries. It is consistent. But at MIT, we said, well, let's address this in our students. And for years, I have tried to get MIT to put this out on the internet. MIT pioneered online courseware. MIT was the first university to go out and say, here's all our content, here's all our courses, it's free, we want to help the world. For various reasons, we didn't get this content out there. Partially, we didn't have the resources, partially because we teach in a very hands-on fashion. The class is not a lecture-based class where everyone just sits there Monday, Wednesday, Friday and takes notes. So it would have been a little more challenging. And I really thought, let me just write up some notes for our students, and maybe this could be the start of it. What I thought was going to be 20 pages of notes quickly became 40, then 80. And once it passed 100, I said, well, I think I have a book here. And so I started Cognosco Media. That's where the book publishing and writing, that's the Cognosco Media part. That's not in the career book, because those aren't quite such essential career skills. The other ones are. But we took the book, we generalized it, because again, it's not just for college students or engineers. This book has now been generalized for people in all industries, all skills. And what we do, we break down these 10 core skills into specific chapters. You don't have to read the book cover to cover. It's designed in a unique way. Most books, you have to start at page 1 and keep going. But here, if you want to get better at, let's say, negotiating, start at chapter 9. Skip the first 8, go right to chapter 9, learn how to negotiate. Then put the book down. Then if you come back and say, I really want to think about my career plan, go back to chapter 1. You can read them in any order. Each chapter can stand alone. Each chapter has a mental shift, how to think differently about this skill. And this all comes from research that we've been doing for decades from MIT and Sloan, and how to approach these skills. And then a lot of concrete tactical things you can do to execute better at this particular skill. And then the chapter concludes with, here's a summary of what we've learned, and here are next steps if you want to go deeper. Because obviously in a single chapter, I can't tell you everything there is to know on this topic. But if I can get you to look at it the right way and get you on your way down the path with some of those concrete, actionable things you can do, we've set you up for success, and now you can take yourself further.
I would consider that to be a unique part of this book because you don't have to start from page one. You can just go to whatever topic that you want to deal with first. We don't see that in a lot of books. And that includes the nonfiction books, the self-help books. We don't see any of that. I think a lot of your self-help books probably do, but not in the sense that you're covering this because some of the topics that you have covered in this book, they're not unique, but they hit at the heart of someone that says, I want to be successful. These are some of the skills that I need to learn, but I don't have to start from page one in order to do that. I can start with a topic that I feel that I need first, and then I will go from there. Are we still there?
Yeah, so you had cut out, so I didn't hear the end of that question.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Is this only being if this program is only at MIT, are other colleges starting to pick up on this?
We're starting to see some nascent growth in other colleges. MIT did this 20 some years ago, and I've encouraged other universities to do it. We're seeing at a few other universities, they might have a few talks on this topic. Now, certainly, I will say universities do generally teach interviewing skills because they have many students who are actively interviewing, looking for a job. They might have leadership centers, and business schools may have courses on some of this, but most people really don't get any deep exposure, not undergrads, not most grad students. And I really think universities need to put this as part of the core curriculum. So we're seeing a few universities kind of put courses out there that may touch upon some of these, but over the next 20, 30, fortunately, even going out 40 years, this is going to take a while. We're going to see a shift in the universities to really focus more on these skills. Not that they should not be focusing on what they're teaching today, but when we look at colleges, they often have a general requirement. You have to take a semester or two of math and science and foreign language and history and literature, just so you get some breadth no matter what your major is. I think we'll start to see some general career skills be part of that requirement so that their students, their graduates, are more effective in the workplace.
And is this also being are there similar programs like this in major corporations?
Unfortunately, no. And it's again another shortcoming. Corporations, the biggest ones, when we think of corporations, 5,000 people and up, they do have within the HR departments, they have what's called L&D, learning and development. Unfortunately, anytime there's a recession, L&D is usually the very first thing to be cut. And then even when they do have programs that haven't been cut, it's usually kind of a single one-off. Think about the following. Companies often say, okay, you are getting promoted to manager, so we're going to send you to management training. We're going to send you to some 3-day workshop to teach you how to be a manager. And you go off and you come back and they say, great, now you know how to be a manager, go run your team. Imagine if I was a basketball coach and I said, welcome to the team. We're so glad we got you. I'm going to send you to a 3-day basketball clinic. go off. Okay, welcome back. You've learned everything you need to know about basketball. You're good for the season. Go play. That would be insane. We know that these skills, like a sport, are ones where you have to practice, you have to drill, you have to reflect. But our education system, both in primary and secondary school, in college, and even at the corporate level, is one of memorization. I
Yeah,
can teach you.
we get that all the time, even in grade school education, middle school, high school. All of the skills that students are learning, they're based on memorization, just like you said. And the majority of them, they graduate high school, for example, they're not ready to tackle some of the real world issues. And I listened to news reports in the past that saying that colleges had to step in the gap to have different courses and programs to actually teach students these basic life skills so that when they graduate college, they'll be able to function in the real world. It's kind of strange. So I'm kind of wondering where this book or some type of program would be beneficial in public education.
I think there would be. And in fact, I have as a free resource on my website how people can start to do this as a program. Now, I give away everything but the publisher. There's some printing costs. We do have to charge for the book, but everything else, certainly the Brain Bump app we talked about, all the other resources on the website, they are all free. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm not trying to build up an email list. I think I have one. If you want to sign up for it, feel free. But it's really about trying to help folks. So the very first resource that you can download completely free is how to create this type of training program for your organization. It's written for a corporation, but it could easily be adapted by an educational institution. And what it comes down to is how to approach these skills. When we teach the quadratic equation, for example, the teacher says, here is the formula, memorize this formula. Now we're going to do some practice examples of this formula. You sit there and you drill, and over time you get familiar with it. And that is fine for the quadratic formula. That's also okay if you're just trying to remember dates in history. But for a skill like leadership, there is no formula. There is no memorize these three things and you will be a great leader. It is more subtle. It is circumstantial. And so the way you want to learn this is to create small peer learning groups. I recommend groups of about 6 to 8 people, and you come together and you have discussions. You talk about the topic. Now, it's helpful to have some context. So you can use a book, for example. And yes, you can use my book. If you want to use my book, I have a download to explain how to chop it up, how to focus on topics. But if you don't want to use my book, you don't have to. You can use other books. You can use other sources of content. You can use articles, podcasts, videos, doesn't matter where it's from, but that group of 6 to 8 people, you all read the same article or read a few pages from a book or watch the same video, and then have a discussion about what was in there, about the leadership or about the networking or about the teamwork and how it worked and what didn't work, and bring in your own examples and other people bring in theirs. And that reflection and discussion, that's where we really learn. That's the equivalent of scrimmage in sports. It's that practice, it's that trying, it's that reflection. That's what's going to help us learn. And that's very easy to create at little or no cost and to scale up.
Um, let's see, we have probably like 10 more minutes. I'd like to bring you on for a part two, because uh, we're going to be discussing your book again, but we want to break it down by topic. And because of time, we're not going to be able to do that today on this particular podcast, if that's okay with you.
Or I'd be happy to come back.
Great. Okay. So if we want to break this down by audience members, how is this book applicable to an experienced executive?
Great question. If you are an experienced executive, you're leading a team or many teams, first, all of us can probably get better at some of these skills, myself included. I've been teaching this, I've been doing this for decades, but I am not at the point where I say I can't get better. And so if, as you look, you say, well, I'm successful, I'm doing well, but still I wish I was better at networking, at team building, at communicating, at some of these skills, great, the book can help you. But even more important is using this to upskill your team. In fact, even if you don't want to get copies of the book for your whole team, which you certainly can, and we have ways to do bulk orders for companies. We do have companies who will order 50, 100, 500 at a time to give out to all their employees. But you can download that first free resource from the book's website, which is at thecareertoolkitbook.com. If you go to the resources page, the very first download, completely free, is how to create that type of peer learning that we were just talking about a few minutes ago, and create that in your group. And whether you use my book or other books or other free sources, go use that content and help to upskill your whole team. Because when you think about how you are more effective by being a better leader or a better networker or any of these skills that makes you more effective, imagine if everyone on your team was more effective. Imagine the impact that is going to have on you and your business. And that's why we want to upskill our organization. So even if you feel you're where you need to be, if that question isn't true for everyone on your team, you can use this book or the other resources to upskill your team.
How can a college student or entry level employee use this book to help them?
For someone in the workforce, whether you're in college, a recent grad, even mid-career, this book, it is your toolkit. And so you can jump right to chapter 7 communication when you say, I feel I need to be more effective here. And then you go back and say, now I want to be a more effective leader. I'm going to chapter 4. So reading the individual chapters will help you develop these skills. And you don't have to do all at once. You can take them one at a time. And of course, by supplementing this with the Brain Bump app, where you'll get all the tips from my book, you're going to not only read this and learn this, but you'll better retain it and have access to it when you need it.
This book can also be gender specific. Is that correct? For example, uh, do men and women, do they negotiate differently? Do they network differently?
We
Uh,
do touch upon
what
some
does
of the topics
gender,
in the book.
what
Yeah,
does
so
gender play in role in communication? What are advantages does a man or woman have in the corporate world? Just an example.
we do touch on some of those for specific genders. In fact, there's a whole call out in the leadership chapter on leadership styles between men and women and what women face, known as the double bind. So regardless of your gender, certainly these skills are applicable. There may be some small adjustments. And of course, there may be adjustments as well, depending upon your culture. How we negotiate, for example, is very different from country to country. And you may have to adapt your style a bit there as well.
And how would this help HR do a better job in having those connections with the company itself and its employees? How would this book help them?
For HR, it's similar to the executive, where certainly you can use it for yourself, but part of your job is to develop your team. And if you create these peer learning groups we talked about, there's actually a myriad of benefits. So here's four key things that happen when you create these peer learning groups. First, you upskill your team. You get more effective employees. That's obviously good for all. Second, you show engagement with your employees. What we've seen the past few years is that people are saying it's not just about the paycheck. I want a company that cares about me, a company where I feel connected. And what you're saying is, yes, we're giving you the paycheck and hopefully we're paying you well, but we care about developing you. We care about making you better, making you a success. And it's not just about the money. That's going to help with retention. Third, you're fostering internal networks. We often think of networking about meeting other people outside the organization, but even within our organization, internal networking is so important. And this will help connect people because those groups you create, those peer learning groups, aren't just here's one for the engineers, here's one for the salespeople. You are supposed to split people across departments. So third, this will help to increase those internal networks. And fourth, it creates a common language. When you've all read the same book or article, you can reference stories and models and sayings, and everyone knows what you mean. So if you were to use the book Good to Great, for example, you can say hedgehog model, and everyone says, I know exactly what you mean because we've all read that book. We all get that model. And so you get better communication as well. So these four things, improved employees, employee engagement and retention, fostering internal networks, and creating a common language. All those come from creating this group, whether you use my book, which is a good framework for this, or just use that peer learning group with other content that is going to help you and your organization.
Now, we talked about the benefits of this being used for a profit corporation, but what about a nonprofit?
The same applies to a nonprofit. A friend of mine once said years ago, the only difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit corporation is the latter just reinvests anything it earns into the organization. But we want the same things about upskilling employees and employee retention and communications and internal networks. We get the same benefits. So if you're a nonprofit, if you're not even an employer organization, if you're just a group, for example, take a church group. You're not employed and paid necessarily. There's lots of volunteers, but could you be more effective? Could you do more as a team if you had these better skills? Then use this in that group as well. It's for any type of organization, and we use that term generally, to get better.
And we want to give the audience a little bit more synopsis of the book. For example, this book is divided into three sections. First one talks about careers, which lays out the process for constructing an actionable career plan. Then guides the reader to success both in interviews and on the job to advance along the career plan. Then in section two, it talks about leadership and management, which focus on the fundamentals of managing and leading, applicable to managers and individuals contributors alike. It details the essentials of a high performing team, how to foster a learning organization, how to reduce meetings by making them more effective, and much more. Unlike typical management books, these tools apply no matter what project management approach an organization uses. And then finally, the third section deals with interpersonal dynamics. This describes how to successfully negotiate, efficiently build a network, and effectively communicate with people from any background. A final chapter on ethics in the workplace provides guidance through common challenges since every employee is sure to face at some point, in their career. Um, so first of all, in relationship to that, have a few questions on that. First of all, what inspired you to write this book, The Career Toolkit?
It came from having taught this for so many years at MIT and knowing that these skills aren't just for MIT students, they are universal. The demand is across all industries, across all sorts of jobs. I just wanted to reach a larger audience.
Do you know why this not being taught in traditional classrooms?
It's because our education system is backwards facing. The education system for primary and secondary school was set up for the industrialized workforce. It's when we left the farms to go work in the city, to go work in factories. We had to learn some basic skills, reading, writing, arithmetic. We needed to learn some basic civics and history so we could be active participants in our communities. But that's all we needed. When your job was working on the assembly line, and whether that's the traditional assembly line of turning screws 8 hours a day, or even the 1950s corporate assembly line, where as a marketer, I sat in my little cubicle, I sat at my desk, my boss would say, go work on this. And you say, yes, sir. Here you go, sir. I'm done. And you had those hierarchical systems. I didn't need to be a good networker. I didn't need to understand how to build effective teams. My boss told me what to do. I did it. Maybe one day I'll get promoted. But when we fast forward to today's workforce, we see a very different dynamic. Now, for example, you have a marketing team and you have a boss who she might not know as much about her subordinates. A 50-year-old head of marketing, she might look at her 24-year-old and say, explain TikTok to me. How are we going to use this? Because I've never used TikTok. I don't know what it is. And so we now have teams where it's not that the boss knows more than everyone else and just orchestrates and coordinates, but now the whole team has to come together with different knowledge and different skills to be successful as a group. And that's very different from how we train people to be that cog in the machine. So unfortunately, our education system was set up for that ladder, that assembly line, whether physical or the corporate assembly line, and it has not yet adapted to the changes of what we're seeing in the workplace. This is going to be another 20, 30 years before it does. To their credit, the education system, I think, did respond somewhat quickly to STEM skills. Back in the 90s, we saw the rise of the importance of STEM skills, really started to emphasize it. And within about 20 years, the education system did say, okay, we're going to promote STEM. We see this as critical for the future. This is not as clear to them. And so I think it's going to take a little while longer for the education system to adjust.
What do you hope is the biggest takeaway from your book?
I hope it's that people recognize the importance of these skills, that I'm certainly not saying we need to teach less of history, English, math, and the other things we do, but we need to recognize these skills are important for success in our careers and in life. And if we can just get people to open up and say, I've heard of this, I've heard it's important, but I can and should be proactive in developing these skills, that is the key change. That is what's going to really impact society.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I have been in the schools this academic year, and I noticed that the skills that are being taught, that students had to memorize it, and then they had to take a standardized test. But when we deal with skills that will actually make them productive citizens, I don't see a whole lot of that in the school system. Um, I find that there needs to be a balance to both of them. Like you said earlier, we need the English, definitely need the English. We need history, we need science, we need all these things. But at the same time, we need those life skills as well that are not being really pushed into the schools because you said it earlier, students are in an environment to where we have to memorize stuff so that we have to in order to take a test. And to me, to me, and this is my opinion, that I feel that students are not getting a well-balanced education. And so, and you and I, we talked, I think we agree on this, that education has become one dimensional, in my opinion. And that, again, I read a lot of reports to where students graduate high school, they get the math and the science and the history and the English and all of that, but they're not getting those skills that will help them prepare for a career, the workforce, or that next chapter or in their lives or being a productive citizen. They're not getting that. And so colleges had to go in the gap and say, okay, we need to fill in what the primary secondary schools are not doing. And this is something that I have heard numerous reports about, read articles, saw videos of news reports, and it's a real strain on colleges. And I do believe that the public education system needs to have that multi-dimensional level of education, not so students are coming to school, they're learning, but they have to memorize, stuff. And then when they leave, they don't retain half of what they learned, nor that they're not prepared to be in the real world. Find that very disturbing. Have to bring that out. Uh, do you agree with some of the things I mentioned, or do you have a different perspective?
I do think there's a gap in education. And even what I'm arguing for, this specific set of skills, isn't even the total set. Now, this is the area where I'd say I have some expertise. We often hear, for example, financial literacy as a key area where students don't understand credit card debt. They don't understand how to create a balanced budget. And I know when I was a student, we used to have what was called home economics. There's
Yep.
a fair amount of cooking and sewing. They may have done a little, or some classes do a little on things like balancing a checkbook, but clearly we're not doing a sufficient job because so many people don't use credit card responsibly and do run into debt. We see other challenges, for example, in relationships. I see so many people get into bad relationships because at no point did their parents ever sit them down and teach them, here's how to think about finding a life partner. In fact, I remember at a party I had years ago, my parents happened to be there, and my mom was sitting down with a guy I knew. And I happened to catch some of the conversation where she was explaining to him, you don't just chase the girl who's really attractive. Do you have values that align? Do you feel that years from now you're going to be on the same page when it comes to things like lifestyle and raising children? And these are questions you need to ask. And this blew him away. He never even thought about those questions. These are things we're not teaching our children, or how to disagree. And we see in society today, I remember doing debate club, and in debate, we had very specific rules. I'm going to provide my arguments. You're going to then do your counter arguments, and we're going to listen and we're going to attack the arguments. But in today's world, it's not about let's see if we can attack each other's arguments. It's about, can I get that mic drop moment? Can I make some snide comment on social media that looks really smug and makes you look stupid? And okay, I win, not because the argument's better, because I got the bigger laugh. And we're not teaching them the right skills, which is, this is a whole other section different from what's being taught and what I have in the book. So I think there is a large gap on multiple fronts.
I am so glad that you mentioned that, because I want to, first of all, bring to the audience attention that I am a substitute teacher. So I go to mostly elementary and middle schools. And so there was two cases, and I'm not going to name any names, and I'm not going to name the school, but there was one particular case to where I began to strike up a conversation about relationships in one middle school. And It was very attentive, and they wanted to know more about my experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they was very tentative. They said that they have learned a lot from those discussions. I believe it was an orientation class. So in this orientation class was a perfect opportunity to mention some of the things that you have mentioned in this podcast that I think that would be a very good way to get the students to really start thinking along the lines of those particular things that they need to learn so that when they get to high school, they will have a better understanding of what's being presented to them. So, again, that was a great opportunity for me to do that. And then in another instance, to where, I ended up having a formal debate with another student. And my question was, and so this student was basically saying that, okay, if a student acts up, I'm going to write them up. And so the debate was centered around, that question, what would you do if you was a teacher and a student was being disruptive in class? And that really uh the student, basically was forced to put on his thinking cap, and really thought about some of the things, that he was saying. And I think that really opened up his eyes to the debating as you and I, know it wasn't the fact, whether or not I won, or he won. It was kind of like getting them to well, not negotiate, but to how to effectively debate your cause and to get your point across and etc. So I wanted to bring those examples to you, Mark, and the audience to kind of relate on some of the things that you had talked about, which means that it's not just a book that's out, that in some instances, myself or anyone that is listening or watching this podcast can say, well, yeah, I can relate to this, and they can give examples, and we can bring real world experiences into some of the things that they talked about in your book. In response to that.
Yeah, I think you're getting to the aspect that it's not just memorization, and it is some of those critical thinking skills. I'm using the term critical thinking broadly because there is the critical thinking we do in debate, but there's also just thinking about the implications of if I run up credit card debt this month, what does that mean next month and month after that? What's that going to do to my finances? Or let me just understand the different perspectives that people can have, that someone might have an opinion different than mine. And it's not simply, well, they're wrong. What are the root causes to get them to think that way? What are the underlying assumptions that they're going off of? And how might that be different? And so really it's getting that thinking beyond just the memorization of knowledge. Now, we do need some memorization of knowledge. For example, when it comes to multiplication, we memorize the multiplication tables. I don't know an easy way to teach 3 times 7. We can show them the dots and we can show how three rows of 7 dots add up. But at a certain point, you just kind of memorize the multiplication table. So when you do long form multiplication, you can see the 3 and the 7. You say, okay, no, that's 21. Knowing some basic US history, knowing when we were founded, knowing the dates of the Civil War and who was present and why things happened, you need that so you have the knowledge to allow for the critical thinking. So we do need some. I'm certainly not going to argue against memorization for some of this, but we need to go beyond that to those reasoning skills.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because this past Wednesday, the American Broadcasting Company celebrated 50 years of a program. They call it a wraparound program, aimed at different skills such as math, science, social studies, things of that nature. It's called Schoolhouse Rock. And
I
this past
remember it. I grew up watching it.
and this past Wednesday, they celebrated the 50th anniversary, of that program. I remember one year, I think I was in eighth grade, and we was studying the Constitution. And for an oral assignment, we had to memorize the preamble of the Constitution, right? So guess how I learned how to recite the preamble? Schoolhouse Rock, of course.
Yep. I still remember Conjunction Junction, What's Your Function? Many of those great tunes. The US government's like a three-ring circus, shot heard around the world. Those were great ways to get kids to do some basic memorization to get
Right,
the
or yeah,
fundamentals
or
of
how to,
grammar.
learn what a noun was. I learned what a conjunction was. I learned what a pronoun was. I know what an interjection is, an adjective, an adverb. I learned all of that. And I also learned how this country was founded, as well. And later on, like in the 80s and 90s, they started having these public service announcements or programs, centering around computers, about money, taxes. They did that. We learned about how electricity came about, things of that nature. And so when I was looking at some of the clips, it kind of like brought me back to my childhood. I mean, it's funny that you brought that up, and I wanted to mention that uh, because that was pretty much a part of my childhood, and those who um, was born in the 70s and early 80s and even the late 60s will probably know what I'm talking about. And by the way, you can actually check out that program. It's on demand on Hulu as well. If you have a Hulu subscription, you can check it out in its entirety there. And they have like different clips on YouTube on some of the songs that was most memorable, particularly how a bill becomes a law. I remember that as well. And so I definitely wanted to show those to the newer generations so that, in hopes that they would help them to learn as well. I thought I should bring that up because I think education wise, that was a milestone in education, as well. I remember when I was in school that we were shown these videos and clips in school as well. And that kind of, help us reinforce some of those basic skills, math, science, social science, English, things of that nature. And I think that they need to bring that back as well. Other programs that kind of help with that, well, of course, with Sesame Street, you had the electric company, you had that, you had Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that taught not only career skills, but a lot of what they taught was moral in nature, how to be an effective citizen, how to be a good person. And so those are the programs that we had, back in the day. And we definitely need to bring those type of programs back to television as well as the classroom. You agree with that?
There's a lot of fronts where we can get education into students, and we need to be more diverse, not just in the classroom, but through educational toys, educational content programming on TV, on the internet, in apps and games. And we are seeing more of those start up. So I do agree with you. We went from 1950s, 1940s, where, well, you're just a little kid and you'll figure things out in school or over time you learn things, to being more proactive. I remember watching the electric company and Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, And we were starting to develop those skills outside of school, especially in an entertainment format. I happen to love school, but not everyone does. And so by embedding the education in other channels, in this case, in children's programming, where I say, oh, I can watch Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, but I can also learn to count or learn other things. We can help to really find different methods of educating people. And we need to continue to do so, not just at that entry level of preschoolers and young children, but even as we continue. And I do see there's certainly been advent of toys, and we see apps for the phone that are billed educational, although some of them are a little dubious in the claims.
Like
But
ABC Mouse, for example.
I don't know that one.
Oh,
But
ABC Mouse? Oh my goodness, that's like, I mean, that's like the popularity of modern education where they use animation to grab a child's attention, and they have like different games, puzzles, or books on different subjects that are age appropriate. It shows up on TV all the time, and I've seen a lot of ads on YouTube. Very, very popular. Sometimes I wish we had that, back in the day. So instead of having a bumper that says this program is brought to you by Philip Morris, on Sesame Street, they have where this program is brought to you by the letter S and the number one.
yep, I
I
certainly
thought
remember
that
that.
I thought that that was I thought that was kind of unique because it was like it kind of like summarized what you learned, for the day. And it's kind of like it summarized what you learned today, and that, during their conversation, they're interactive, they'll use that particular number or that letter or that letter in their conversation. Like for example, if today's letter is S, in their conversations, they'll use a lot of words that have the word S, in it. And I thought that that was very unique. By the way, that program still comes on today. Is started in 1969. So it's roughly over 50 years old, 50 plus years old. And that program still comes on today. And it has evolved, over years, but nevertheless, the concept is still the same. Well, this has certainly been a very educational segment. You definitely have a tool that I think that kids and adults alike can definitely benefit from, and it's badly needed. I think you have a project and a book, by the way, that is going to be very innovative in the world of education. And I see this product is going to revolutionize education in the future. I really do see that, and it really hits at the heart of the skills that we need to know, whether you're an adult or a young person, and it's going to transform education in the 21st century. Certainly needed. And I am certainly am appreciative that you're on here to present this to us and the audience today. Now, how are they able to get a hold of you if they have more questions, if they want to purchase the book or they want to get the app?
I'm going to give you two different websites. The first is for the book. The book, The Career Toolkit, you can go to the careertoolkitbook.com. And at that website, you can see where to buy the book, physical or electronic, Amazon, of course, but then you can find it through local bookstores or other sources. You can get in touch with me. You can follow me on social media or read additional articles that I put out every week. We also have the resources page on that website with a number of free resources, some from my website. Sometimes I link to other websites with free resources. And all the first one, of course, being that peer learning program that we talked about that you can use to develop these skills in your organization, in your teams, all of this completely free. And all of this is at thecareertoolkitbook.com. And then for the app, for the Brain Bump app, which is completely free, you can go to brainbumpapp.com. And at that website, you can follow the links to go to the Apple or Android stores where you can download it for free. If you're looking at on your laptop, you can use your phone to snap the QR codes we have on there to go and download it for free. Once you download the free app, the content on there is all free. And if you are interested in getting your content on there, if you are a teacher, if you're an author, if you're a content creator, you can get in touch with us. At the bottom of brainbumpapp.com, at the bottom of that page, there's a link that says apply here. You can fill out the form, takes 30 seconds. Tell us about your content and we will be in touch. So the Brain Bump app and all of that you can find at brainbumpapp.com.
Great, great information here. Um, Again, thank you so much for being part of the show today. And it is a tradition here at the Auster-led broadcast section that whenever we have a guest on one of our podcasts, that we ask the guest for a last word.
I
So,
would. Mhm.
what is your last word?
We all focus on our domain skills, and we should. If you're in medicine, you need to stay abreast of what's happening in medicine so you know the newer techniques. I need to keep up with what's happening in technology. We all need to know our domains. But by looking at these other skills, these soft skills, these professional skills, getting just a little bit better at those makes us so much more effective within our domain, no matter what it is. So I would encourage everyone to invest in these skills. If you want to get my book, fantastic. If you just want to get the tips through the free app, that's great too. If you want to get these skills through some other book, through some other means, do that. I just want to encourage you to develop these skills no matter how you do it, because it's going to make you so much more effective at your job and in life.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Herschberg. Ladies and gentlemen, show some love from Mr. Mark here. He has certainly been very informative, not to mention innovative. And I wish you to best in your endeavors, your career, and whatever you're doing. And we will be having a part two on this because I would love to for you to discuss developments in what you're doing. And we also want to break down some, 'cause I have some questions relating to some of the topics that are discussed in your book. And, you can answer them, but I don't want you to provide any spoiler alerts, because you want people to purchase the book, right?
I'm
So we don't
happy to
need
get into some of the details.
so we
I'm not
don't
one. Yeah, I'm not one to say, oh, I'll give you part of the answer, but go buy the book. I am here to help people however I can do that.
Okay, normally when a guest comes on here and they're showcasing their books, we usually don't encourage the spoiler alerts. Uh, but that's pretty much up to the individual. We want people to support what you do. We want people to purchase the book.
Yeah.
But we're not going to, stop someone if they want to be as detailed as possible. We're not going to stop them, from doing it. But we do encourage the audience members to support the guests in any way shape or possibility that they have. So that's kind of like a policy that we have here at OBS. But if a guest want to go into detail about what they are offering, we're not going to stop them. This is your platform to be the expert.
I'm happy to provide value to the audience however I can.
Great. Okay. Well, we want to thank you, Mark, for being part of the show today. And we hope that you'll be back soon. So we will have Mark back here for a part two. The date has not been discussed yet, but we will get back to you as soon as we have a date that is available. OBS has become a very popular so far that for most of our podcasts, we are booked to May.
Great. We will
We
meet up again sometime this summer.
we are pretty much in some cases we are booked to May in some of our podcasts, and for others we are close to being booked for the month of May. And so that's how popular we are becoming in 2023. We're still getting a lot of requests for guests for our podcast, and it pretty much shows just how popular that the network has become. And we are so grateful to people like yourself who are willing to use this platform to be helpful to other people as well as to showcase themselves. And you, the audience members who tune in week after week. We try to our best to provide our audience members with solid content. And you cannot get more solid than what you heard and seen today. So thank you so much. And we will be in touch. And that would do it for us here. Be sure to join us next week for another episode. I hope that you will join us as well. We will have another great guest, more great topics, and information that you can use. Until then, I'm Keith Williams. Thank you so much for joining us today and have a great weekend.